What's up, guys? Stacy here from Becoming Financially Fit, and today we're going to be discussing investing during a war to preserve wealth. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So with everything that's been going on with the US and Iran, I thought it would be a good idea to make a video about how to invest during times of war. And more importantly, I'm going to be discussing some of the best defense stocks for 2020. So before we get into the content, I make videos about personal finance, financial literacy, savings, and investing. So if you're interested in any of those topics, make sure you subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell to be updated anytime I post new content. So to start out, I kind of want to give you guys the actual definition of a defense stock, which is not to be confused with defensive stocks, which are stocks that regardless of market conditions are going to fare pretty well in the market. They're going to give you consistent dividends, and they're also not going to fluctuate much in up times or in bad times. So those are defensive stocks, but we're not going to be discussing that today. Today, we're going to be discussing defense stocks. A defense stock refers to a company that manufactures things like weapons, ammunition, aircraft. They could also do things like radar, all the things that go into preparing for battle or for staging troops. Those are the things that the defense stocks and companies that provide defensive warfare materials, that is what a defense stock is. And so now you might ask the question, how do defense stocks make money? So how do those companies that actually manufacture all this stuff actually make money? Well, they do it in a couple of different ways. The first way is by getting government contracts that are usually 5 to 10 years. So they're pretty substantial for billions and billions of dollars with different government agencies. Sometimes that might be the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force. It really doesn't matter, but they'll go to the Pentagon or some type of nation. It doesn't have to be the US. It could be anywhere around the world, or it could also be a private security company. So what they do is they go out and they bid on these different contracts. And the contracts, like I said, could be anything. It could be artillery, it could be ammunition, it could be vehicles. Anything that company will provide, they get to go bid on it with these different companies or governments. And so what happens if they actually get those contracts? Well, the contracts are kind of sorted out into different phases. Sometimes they'll pay a phase up front, and then after a certain amount of period and amount of goods are delivered, they'll pay out some more. The good thing about these contracts is the fact that they're pretty much guaranteed if that company can actually keep up with the demand. So if you have a contract, let's say that goes over 5 years, you're going to get paid out consistently. So it's good for those defense stocks and those defense companies because their revenues are usually very, very consistent year after year. What makes these companies actually good during times of war and how you can invest in these companies during a war is the fact that during a war, there's going to be more demand. So that means that they're going to have the opportunity to generate higher revenue during those times of war. So now, what are some of the benefits of being in that defense industry, that defense stock section? So I'll name a couple things just right off the bat. I'll say that in order to actually get into that defense world and actually produce and actually compete at that high level, you have to have an enormous barrier of entry because most of the companies will need to go through an entire process of pre-clearance and to make sure they're good enough to work with a particular government or private industry company. So when that happens, usually the bigger companies can afford to go through that entire process and they can actually vet their employees better. So when you actually get to the point where you need to get vetted by the government, that happens smooth and easy. A company like a startup really can't do that because it costs so much money and you have to jump through so many hoops, and it takes a long time to actually get that process actually from start to finish. So the bigger companies have a huge advantage. So any of the incumbents currently in those positions have a great advantage. Before we go any further, drop a comment below and let me know if you guys have any defense stocks in your portfolio currently, how they've been doing over that time period, and if you guys have any recommendations for me. Let's get back into it. Another barrier to entry for the defense sector are the fact that you need a huge amount of working capital to even compete in the space. What happens is when you actually go out and you bid on these contracts, in order to get that work started, even though they're going to pay you a little portion of that initial 5 to 10 year contract, you're going to have to put up most of the money, or let's say the company will have to put up most of the money in order to get all of those supplies together. So if that means they're doing ammunition, missiles, tanks, anything like that, they actually have to build that stuff And then when they actually deliver it, that's when they get the payment on the back end. So without a good working capital and great cash flow, you're not going to be able to compete at that level. So like I said, that's why some of the incumbents that I'm going to be talking about are so high tier, in my opinion, in that defense sector, because they've been doing this for, let's say, 50 to 100 years. So for them, working capital is not a problem. Let me touch on a few other points that are great for the incumbents in that defense category. So one thing just to note is the fact that there are some strict deadlines. When it comes to a defense contract, you actually have to produce, and you have to produce on time, and it has to be satisfactory. You can't really have defects in the materials that you give to the government or that private company. It has to be top tier, because this is going to be going into war with soldiers, so there can't be any hiccups in that entire process. And so what that means is that because there are these strict deadlines, you need to have a great global supply chain. You need to get your raw materials ready to go. You need to make sure your factories are in good working order to make sure that you can meet these strict deadlines year in and year out, because if you can do that, then you're going to continue to get those government contracts, which is going to just hit your bottom line and start to increase that share price. Another thing that I will note is the fact that governments have dedicated spending. And what this means is that they have a budget each year, and a portion of that budget goes directly to defense spending for that particular country. So that can go to different branches of the military for the pay for the soldiers or the civilians that are in the government, but it can also go towards those companies that are providing the contracts. And so when you look at the budgets for some of the countries, and I'll give you guys an example with the US, these contracts are, the budgets, are so big that these companies have almost limitless amounts of potential revenue. So just for example, the US government, their budget is $718 billion, and that's only for 1 year. So that's going into 2020. Their budget is going to be about $720 billion. And even though I gave you guys an example of how the US and their budget is set up, these defense companies and defense stocks, they actually work with governments all over the world. So it's not like they're only linked to one particular government or one particular region, but a company like Lockheed Martin or Boeing, they can work with just about every country, and they can offer their products. So each country is actually dedicating money to pay directly to these companies. So it's a great thing when you think about how high the barriers to entry are, and some of these incumbents that are actually doing great jobs now, then they have a great supply chain, global supply chain. They have great rapport with these governments and the private industry. So it's good to look at what they're doing and how that can actually apply to investing during a war to preserve your wealth. So one of the things that initially sparked my interest when it came to the defense industry and defense stocks relatively to the S&P 500 and other companies like that was the fact that over the last 10 years, the defense stocks have actually outperformed the S&P 500. And so if you look at the S&P Aerospace and Defense Select Industry Index, which is kind of like an index of the entire defense industry, over the past 10 years, that's actually outperformed the S&P 500. The S&P had a 13.34% gain over the past 10 years. But if you look at the defense sector, that index, it's been up 18.84% over the past 10 years. And so if we break down to the 5-year chart, the trend is still the same. As you can see here from the graph, 12.15%, that's what the S&P 500 got over the past 5 years. And the defense industry, that index got 18.25%. And like I said, that index is a collection of all of the defense companies. Some did better, some did a little worse, but overall you can see that outperformed the S&P 500 over that same 5-year time period. Taking a look at the 3-year, you can see it's even more exaggerated. The S&P 500 got 15.28% over that 3-year time period, and the defense industry got 23.12%. So you guys can see the trend. Let me go down to actually the year to date. So that's going to be just the past couple of days, because we just kicked off the year. You can see that the defense industry, and I know we've heard some things with Iran and different things like that, so there might be a little bit of conflict, but just over the past, let's say a little over a week, the defense industry is at 5.51% for the year to date, which is about 9 days, and the S&P 500 is only up 1.42%. So you guys can kind of see the correlation during times of war, or even over the last 5 to 10 years. The defense industry and those defense stocks are outperforming the S&P 500 greatly. Guys, bringing all of that together, what I like to do, my investing style, is to look out for different alternatives, things that people aren't really talking about, the sexy stocks, things like that, and actually find where I can find value and where I can put my money to actually preserve wealth. And so, like I said, the title of this video was Investing During a War to Preserve Wealth, and I think that taking a holistic look at the defense industry and defense stocks, and taking a look at some of the top defense companies and how I can put my money into those companies to preserve my wealth over time, that's what I'm going to be doing going forward. So like I said, I'm going to be putting a couple of those companies into my portfolio. Hopefully you guys can actually tune into that. But if you guys like the content that I'm putting out, make sure you give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to be updated anytime I post new content. If you guys have any questions about any of the stocks we discussed today, make sure you drop a comment below, and let me know if you guys are hip to the defense sector, or if you guys have any defense stocks in your portfolio today. But other than that, this was an update of how to invest during a wartime period in order to preserve your wealth. So I'll see you guys soon.